Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine War Update extra video, giving you extra nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. I'm squeezing out an extra one today because I've got a lot of content and I don't want too much of a backlog. Also, this has just happened today. I just wanted to mention this. So what is this? It's another missile that has hit Zaparesia. This has been this is a residential building that has been quite clearly hit by a missile. I don't know, possibly an S-300. Zaparesia has quite a number of hits by S-300s. People are saying this is a new Dnipro, like we saw in Dnipro, where a whole host of people died in a similar situation, but others have said it's not another Dnipro, it's another Zaparesia. This happens in Zaparesia really quite often. This is the most revealing video, I think. Just shows, this is clearly a residential area. This is clearly not a military target, and indeed, apparently, there are no military targets around this area either. And then bang, that is just a huge explosion and devastation that comes with that, and that will be the loss of civilian life. Absolutely terrible. And I was seeing somewhere else that actually there's another missile that's stuck on top of a residential building that didn't go off. So it could have been way worse, as Null Report says there. Absolutely shocking, really. Not a fan of this. So this is it a war crime? I would say yes. You are firing missiles into civilian areas, into a city that doesn't have any, well, at least I can't discern any military targets around there. Just it's unconscionable, sorry. And Putin has been issued an arrest warrant by the ICC for the illegal deportation of children from Ukraine to Russia. I can't imagine he's not going to be issued further arrest warrants for, rubber stamping actions like this. It's just a real shocker. But it hasn't stopped. I mean, this is not uncommon in this war. You look at Mariupol, the whole city was razed to the ground essentially because of the Russian invasion, and we have huge hits on Kramatorsk, on civilians there, on Dnipro, and here in Zaparesia as well. Just, yeah. Moving on to a Kenneth Runt synopsis, and the reason I'm reading this to you is because there's an interesting quote or an interesting claim in here. So his sort of report for today: no significant changes on either front. In and around Bakhmut, the Russians continue with the same tactics and with the same results. No changes. The fighting is tough, and in the city itself, the ratio is 1 to 2 or 1 to 3, depending on where you count. So this was the claim. This is in reference to the claim that it was 1 to 5 or 1 to 7 in Bakhmut, and now that ratio has really adjusted towards a parity. But still, he claims 1 to 2, 1 to 3. Can you trust that? I don't know. The same attack vectors: Ivanivska, Prechechina, Kromova, Bodanivka, Hirivka, Novomarkova, Orikova, Vasilivka, Minkivka, and Privilya. So you will know some of those places if you've been paying attention to my mapping. The Western media is currently talking about the day when Wagner's prison inmates' 6-month contracts expire. I'd mentioned that this morning, as if it would have a great significance for Wagner. It absolutely does not. Most of them are forced to stay until the bitter end. If Wagner withdraws, it is the end of the Wagner boss, both economically and politically. It's interesting. I do wonder whether you would see any significant numbers of Wagner convicts actually move back to Russia, actually be released by Wagner. That was the agreement. Whether it will happen, I don't know. Many also talk about our drone attack in Crimea as if it were a sensation. We have been carrying out drone attacks by sea, air, and land for some time now. So this is the last night's drone attack with using both aerial drones and maritime drones on Sevastopol. What is remarkable is not the attack itself, but it shows how vulnerable Russian logistics are. So now he's sort of flipping to the one at Jankoy, where the railway line was hit, supposedly with cruise missiles on board the railway carriage. The railway is important for them. Now they had to come up far north because they could turn south again. Basically, if you remember the map, they had to, in order to get to Sevastopol, you've got to actually go north to Jankoy before doglegging down south. The effectiveness of our intelligence service, they knew exactly when the missiles were at the pit stop. Now, I'm not completely sold that there might have been missiles there, but I don't know that they exploded. There was no secondary explosion. There was a big primary explosion. So whatever hit them had a significant explosive on board, or it did hit something, but I don't know, like a fuel tank or something. But there was no secondary explosion, so I don't think cruise missiles blew up in that attack, as the General Staff of Ukraine have said. Third point, he says, the use of Chinese drone in the middle of the China-Russia meeting. And fourth, he says that the Russian air defense could not detect a slow-flying drone. Now for some interesting news. This is, I don't know what to make of this. 5 Leopard tanks, and I don't know if that's Leopard 1 or Leopard 2, have moved from Chasiv Yar towards Bakhmut center. The decision to send in armor means that something of importance has been found. The wagons are of the early modernized model. So that appears to mean like an early version of the Leopard 2. But it could mean a modernized Leopard 1. I don't know, but I don't know they've got any Leopard 1s in Ukraine yet, that they've been modernized, that they've been brought up to spec. So it appears Leopard 2. I'll be absolutely gobsmacked if Ukraine have sanctioned using Leopard 2s before the counteroffensive and in Bakhmut. Probably we want firepower for a front pocket and have analysed the risk of losing them as small poker game, or yesterday the field hospital became self-sufficient in energy. Okay, then he goes on to talk about the stuff he normally does in his threads. Now, I find that incredible. I don't know whether to believe that. I would think it'd be thoroughly surprising if the Ukrainians were putting Leopard 2 tanks into the battle already, into Bakhmut. Just, I can't see it. Now, I heard that they'd sent, I think, T-64s along the highway to the south, just around Ivanivska, the T-0504 highway. Now, that makes loads of sense. Don't have a problem with that. Just, I'd be really surprised if that's Leopard tanks. And if they're not, then, you know, that dents, obviously, Kenneth Gregg's credibility. I know some people's Russian figures don't put much store in what his sort of summaries of what's going on are. But I think they're quite interesting to look at. It has a few interesting views, but yeah, that would be big news. So I'd certainly disbelieve that until provided further evidence. Okay, on to the Crotale, a short-range surface-to-air missile system shooting down a Russian cruise missile in Ukraine. This is the first footage of a Crotale. I think there are 2 of these in Ukraine that have been given to them by the French. What are these? Well, these are they have been around since the late 1960s. They were designed. Produced in the early 70s. Obviously, these things get upgrades and whatnot. They can fly as high as 6,000 meters with a 9,000 meter height for the Mark III. I don't know what version the Ukrainians have. So with the first type, it's an 11-kilometer range, as I said, with a flight ceiling of 6 kilometers, 16-kilometer range for the Mark III with a flight ceiling of 9,000 meters. So that's fairly decent range and height that they can get to. Maximum speed, the basic type is 800 meters a second, so 2.3 Mach or 3.6 Mach 3.6, sorry, which is 1,250 meters per second. So capable enough air defense system, the sort of thing that they need. Well, now we can see it actually being used here. So let's check this out. So they're pretty much happy with that. So I don't know if that meant the first... Turn that off. I don't know if that meant the first launch failed and then they had a second pop at it. But there you go. And that is what it looks like on a trailer there, towed with some fairly substantial looking rocket tubes there, or missiles actually. So yeah, that's the Crotale. Now we're going to go on to a wee little thread from Mick Ryan. So this Mick Ryan thread is about the hit on Jankoi that the General Staff claimed hit cruise missiles, but I don't know that it did actually hit cruise missiles. There's no secondary explosion. Mick Ryan says of this, I mean, it's not necessarily to do with the cruise missiles here, so this thread is still pertinent. The reports of a Ukrainian attack on a train allegedly carrying Russian missiles in Crimea is interesting. While the nature of the target is to be confirmed, there are a couple of potential implications, and actually it's probably worth me grabbing a map to show you where this hit. I know many of you will know this, but Jankoi is a very important hub of here we go, logistics hub. So it's in the northern area of Jankoi, and it connects Sevastopol and Simferopol to the sort of land bridge connecting Crimea to the rest of Ukraine, or basically Ukraine to Crimea, but also Russia to Crimea through the Kerch, over the Kerch Bridge. So you've got the railway connecting Jankoi, and then it doglegs back down south, but at the same time connects Melitopol and Kherson to Crimea, and indeed those regions to Russia. So if you want to supply troops, if you want to supply supplies, ammunition, whatever, to your troops and your forces and to civilians in the Melitopol and Kherson area, yes, you can do that train journey from through Luhansk and Donetsk, but you're probably going to have to pass by Volnovakha and this railway here, which is basically interdicted, really. So essentially, it's got to come from Russia through Kerch and across there. But then the Kerch Bridge is also still taken out as far as rail traffic goes. Now, if you're going to hit Jankoi there, then you're going to mess everything up again. You're going to mess Sevastopol and Crimea from being accessed from rail coming over from Luhansk and Donetsk, and vice versa. And so it all just becomes really, really difficult for the Russians. Mick Ryan says of these implications. First, despite the overwhelming focus on the Battle of Bakhmut at the moment by many, Ukraine is continuing as well with its deep fight against Russian operational and strategic targets. Now, we hear a lot less about what's going on with the drone warfare, the large drone sort of warfare, not the small drones dropping IEDs and whatnot. There's plenty of footage of that. But these larger attacks and the HIMARS that's consistently happening, HIMARS attacks, we're hearing less about that because I think it's being drowned out to some degree by what's going on in Bakhmut and Avdiivka and Vuhledar. But it is continuing. This is important because it forces the Russians to rethink their force posture and defensive deployments in Crimea and beyond. And here we have that map of the logistics in the area, and it does connect up to rail networks in the southern occupied regions as well. And it allows the Ukrainians to collect intelligence on Russian responses in Crimea as the Ukrainian armed forces plan future military operations there. A second implication is that it places further pressure on Russia's limited stock of missiles. Several sources confirm Russia is now only able to fire what it produces monthly. Its war stocks have been used extensively in the past year, referring back to a UK intelligence update, but there's quite a few analyses of the Russian stocks of missiles. Third, it is an indication of how Ukraine will be able to conduct such strikes across Crimea with greater frequency once it takes back more of its southern territory. Ultimately, if Ukraine can make Crimea untenable for Russian military forces, it helps Ukrainian strategy. This is a really important point. So there is a lot to be said about whether Crimea would be attacked, and I would agree with this, that Crimea is a step too far for the Ukrainian army. They just don't have the capability, they don't have the capacity to take Crimea. So let's look at this map. It's just too difficult. you got a very thin land bridge, an isthmus to get into Crimea, or a couple of them, and that means it's probably quite easy to hit the Ukrainians as they come across there. And the amount of troops you'd need to take such a huge area, and this is a jewel in the crown for the Russians, so they defend this to the hilt. But what they can do is take out, with distance munitions and ordnance, they can take out key places in Crimea. They can take out railway and road hubs such that it becomes untenable for the Russians to stay there and use it. It loses its utility because you just can't supply it or do anything useful with it because you're getting hit consistently. So you could even hit Sevastopol, as they have done over the last 24 hours with naval and aerial drones. You just keep hammering these places so that they end up just pulling out of Crimea. So you don't have to take Crimea, but you can just hammer it into kind of uselessness for the Russians. So it's an indication of how Ukraine will be able to conduct such strikes across Crimea with greater frequency once it takes back more of its southern territory. Ultimately, if Ukraine can make Crimea untenable for Russian military forces, it helps Ukrainian strategy. So I repeated that because that, I wanted to go into a bit more detail of that. So finally, it reinforces that Ukraine will target Russian forces wherever they are in Ukrainian territory and keeps the Crimea issue alive. Despite the misgivings of some about taking back Crimea, strikes like this make it clear Ukraine intends to take it back. A final interesting issue is the timing. Coming as Xi visits Putin for their Moscow authoritarian love fest, it could permit Putin to reinforce the case for Chinese assistance. But it is more likely to cause Putin embarrassment in front of his friend more than anything else. Remember, this happened a couple of days ago when Xi was in Moscow. Strikes like this are not war-winning silver bullets, but their impact is cumulative on the degradation of Russian morale and war-fighting capability. And I think that's absolutely true. And you would hopefully see, if you're pro-Ukrainian and want Ukraine to prevail, you'll hopefully see an awful lot more of these taking place. We have seen over time Crimea be prodded and probed with a whole array of different drones, different capability drones, different ranges, different explosive capacity, and so on and so forth. Explosive capability, I should say. And they are just trying to find out what works best, and naval drones, of course, as well. But I just think that Crimea is going to be on the cards going forward. It's going to be ripe for the picking in terms of using long-range munitions. I don't expect you to see troops in Crimea, Ukrainian troops in Crimea, until the very end, really. That would be my guess. That I wouldn't do that. But I would expect to see this land bridge taken in the counteroffensive. I'm sure this will be their number one objective. And once you get down to here, or even, I don't know where they might choose to go, whether they would bother to take Melitopol or just cut it off. It could be that you come down to here. As soon as you start being able to get Ukrainian long-range equipment, long-range missiles positioned here, then you start being able to hit Crimea much more consistently. And if you have 120-kilometer range missiles, then things start looking dicey for the Russians on Crimea, and it becomes untenable to stay there. So I think it's not going to be about invading Crimea, but it's going to be about making life too difficult for the Russians to remain there. So that is just today's short one, really, on for today's extra. Just to clear out some of the content before I continue with my big juicy ones tomorrow, so to speak. Anyway, thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks so much to my new members of the channel. I know I don't do enough content, if any at all, for those members, because I just don't have enough time in the day, but I will do soon. Von Dalen, Michael Daly, Eric Berg, legends one and all, Andy McGee, Augusto Fioretti, Vivian Collins, Sean Lindsay, and Smith. Particular thanks indeed to Andy McGee and Augusto Fioretti for being deep geopol thinkers, which means they are truly thoughtful geopolitical legends or something. Thank you so much for joining, and I will put a list of all the members up as a permanent thanks, as a kind of screen at the end of some of my extra videos. That will be forthcoming just as a thank you. I really appreciate all the support I get, including on Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal. Really, really amazing. And thanks for joining this journey with me. Anyway, take care, and I will speak soon.